So I'm happy to welcome you to the gallery. Actually, I've had a very interesting relationship to Vilnius because I went in 2001 with the artist Samuel Bak for an exhibition that took place at the National Gallery. I don't know, those of you who are from Vilnius may know the name Zingeris.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like to the second power. Yeah, but Manuelis was then running the Jewish Museum, and I actually met him in May of 2001 here in Boston, and he said, you know, we're going to do an exhibition of Bach. He's from Vilna and so forth. And I said, that's fine, where are you going to have the exhibition? He said, in the new Jewish Museum. And I said, that's a nice idea. Is it finished? He said, no. I said, do you have an alarm system? No. So he gave me, every time I asked him, do you have insurance? No. So this was May the 26th. I remember vividly this conversation. And I said, well, you know, this is probably $1 million worth of paintings. It would be a good idea if you had a nice facility with air conditioning for art. And, no problem. And in the next few months, he actually got SAS airline to pay for the shipping. He got a German insurance company to pay for the insurance. And then his museum was not finished. So he convinced the director of the National Museum to take 7 rooms of their paintings out and put up Bach's paintings. So 2001 was when 9/11 happened. So Bach's exhibition was scheduled to open, I think, the 23rd of September. So just 2 weeks, barely 2 weeks afterward. And Sam flew 2 days before. Right after 9/11, you had to be at the airport 4 hours before a flight, because now the security was people running around the airport here with guns, and it was crazy. And I got there 4 hours before and waited, and then flew to London, to Heathrow, and then got to Vilnius for the exhibition. And it was totally amazing. I mean, it was worlds apart from what had gone on here and all of the upset. And it was a wonderful show. Sam was very, very generously welcomed. And then there became a very nice relationship between he and people in Vilnius. And eventually, in one of the visits he had later, he said that he would give 125 paintings, donate them to Vilna. Assuming that what they said they would do, which is to build a museum for those works. And many of you must know the situation in any country, but raising money for museums is not an easy thing. But they've actually succeeded in building the first part of the museum, and he's given 54 of those paintings already, and they're there. And so last November, almost right now, I was there with him, and we spent about 5 days going through the city, visiting Ponari and so forth. And Sam was made an honorary citizen at that point of Vilnius at City Hall. It was rather remarkable. The mayor is a tall, thin man, and Bach is about this big. So it was a really interesting moment for him, and Sam gave a really quite moving speech, saying that he was giving these works in memory and in honor of all of his family that had been destroyed there. And it was a very sobering kind of remark, but he said, I'm doing it for a better future. And I really come to believe that that's why he gave the works and why we've worked so hard to make that museum happen. There'll be a second museum of his work in Houston, Texas, which is a funny place if you think about the United States, except there's already a very good Holocaust museum there. And they've raised $48 million to build an addition. And in that museum, there will be 2,000 square feet just of Bach's paintings. Houston is the most diverse city in the United States in terms of population. And they have translated his memoir from English into Spanish. 40% of the people who visit that museum speak Spanish already. And they have taken the 125 paintings and made 2 catalogs, one in English and one in Spanish. So the notion that it be available to all the public, so that although Bach's work and his own life is a very specific one to events and history, it's also a universal one. And although this piece is called The Family and is filled with Bach's memories of many, many of the people who he was told about, most of whom had already died or were destroyed, it becomes a kind of memorial painting, a chorus of voices of people who have departed. He painted this in 1974 when he was in New York. So his journey was surviving the war, then going to the DP camp in Germany for 2 years called Landsberg, and from there went to Marseille, and Marseille to Palestine, which became Israel. In 1957, he had a fellowship to go to Paris, spent many years in Paris, Rome, and went back to Israel, and then came back to Europe in the late 70s and moved here 25 years ago. So he lives 20 minutes from here. He's 85 years old, and is still working to the extent that he probably is painting 100 paintings a year, which is extraordinary. And to have 100 ideas a year is just amazing. So it's a gift from my perspective that he's as productive as he is, because from my point of view, he's actually creating visual testimony. It's not only testimony about specific events, but about human behavior. And I think he feels, and I feel very strongly with him, that his paintings today are even more important than 20 or 30 years ago, especially with the present administration in Washington and the way that they treat all people. Sam's work talks about moral responsibility and standing up and speaking out. We've made a poster of this, and we've put it in school rooms around the United States and around the world. And the young people's interpretation of this is not that these are only survivors, but instead of moving toward destruction and the crematory in the background, they're looking out at us as viewers, saying, where were you when all this happened? Were you bystanders? Or did you stand up and make a difference? Did you intervene in stopping what was going on? And although it's a painting, it's also a painting that cries out in many ways for us to behave very differently. There's also the notion of the human form, the faces, and then the eggs. And it really points to the fact that all of us are very fragile. This large piece here, the egg in the egg cup with the 3 bullet holes, Bak has done one single large painting of just that image, and it's in memory of Robert Kennedy. So the issue of assassination, of destruction, of human inhumanity to one another is implicit in all these. These images with the targets mean that many of us are all targets. We're targeted one way or another. Many of the people are blind. Many cannot hear. It's as if we close down our senses when horrible things go on, and we don't take upon ourselves the responsibility to somehow interact with them. So for me, having his work in the gallery is a very important part of what we do. There are very beautiful objects around, wonderful ceramics and wonderful paintings. Sam's work is wonderful art, but at the same time has another dimension that calls upon all of us to, I think, live our lives different than we do. This painting, which I love, in addition to everything else, uses the old surrealist device of a painting within a painting. So the painting is on an easel in the middle of this piece with all these various figures. And I used to have, my Aunt Rose used to have one of those fox stoles with the little beady eyes that looked out at me and scared me as a child. So it comes out of the 20s and 30s in a way, the memories of what it was like as a child. And his memoir that I mentioned, it's in Spanish, was written in English, has been translated into German, Polish, and Lithuanian. And we saw it when we were, and this image is on the cover of the Lithuanian translation that was there. That was another thing that Zinger said he'd do, and he did. Bak has this amazing ability to take an image and then work with it over and over again. And this particular painting is based upon a very famous German wood engraving by Albrecht Dürer called Melancholia. Many of you probably know it. It was created just at the beginning of Enlightenment, where reason and reasonable behavior would begin to inform our entire world. And sadly, what's happened is the reverse. So one of the documentaries on Sam that we have, Sam says the Nazis took so much from him, he thought he'd take one thing from them. So he's taken this image and then redefined it in the context of modern history for him. So here there's the angel, here contemplating the meaning of life and so forth. Here the angel's transformed, it still has the wings, but has a helmet of a First World War soldier with a laurel wreath, which the angel still has. You have the measuring devices, the calipers in the book, but then instead of all the fabric that's here, you have the prayer shawl or the talit coming off the lap of the angel. Here you have the circle, the mill wheel, and the millstone, and the prism. And Bach has only the circle, but it has a bullet hole in it. So again, the perfection that's here begins to become broken and destroyed, done by people, not by anybody else. And then in the background, you have the 10 Commandments with the Hebrew letters. This is 1, 2, and 3, and then 6, which becomes a very important part of the commandments. It's not a quiz, but the 6th commandment is thou shalt not murder in terms of the 10 Commandments, so it becomes the most desecrated of the commandments, but they're also like tombstones. He uses the same shape in the background for the niches, and if you see this, the Sabbath candles are extinguished, and then the plaster on the walls has been removed, and you have the bricks of the crematoria ovens. So it's all in a single image. This side of the painting at the bottom, you have the 6-pointed star, the yellow star that Jews were made to wear, and above it, looming above it, is the crucifix, also as a kind of sacrificial place. The rainbow, which appears here and is perfect, is broken, and the colors of the rainbow have fallen off. The rainbow appears first in the Noah story at the end of the flood, and the rainbow symbolizes the fact that there will never be another destruction. But there are ultimately numbers and numbers and numbers of destructions. So the rainbow or the covenant is broken, again by mankind. And finally, this is the only version of this image. He has above the angel a little tent, which is like a chuppah, a marriage chuppah in Jewish tradition, under which the bride and groom sit. So the issue of holy and profane, the desecration that went on, the desire for a much better way of living, all are represented in a single image based upon an image that has totally been perverted over the last 500 years. Down at the end, there are 2 small paintings, drawings actually. And the reason I like to show those is to let you know that underneath all these paintings is extraordinary drawing. He can come to the canvas with an idea and draw it in charcoal, and just basically put the colors in. He has so many ideas in his head. One of my favorite quotes from Sam is that all these paintings are knocking at my studio door. So he's just waiting to have the time. And time becomes the most relevant part of his existence, so that he'll be able to continue to create. The upper one again, the angels, and if you look carefully, all these angels' wings are so heavy that they'll never fly. So there's constant contradictions in all the parts of Sam's world. Most of the worlds are broken. Here you have, in the biblical times, you took your shoes off when you were standing in a holy place. Here the shoes are off, but you're standing in a desecrated place. So the tension between the holy and the profane. And this small piece down below uses the shapes of the houses as tombstones. And then if you look carefully, one of these has the 6-pointed star. So it's a cemetery, essentially. And all the tombstones of the houses have bullet holes in them. So again, the referencing to the destruction, but in a language that he chooses. And then finally on this panel, there are 2 very different paintings. One is very recent. This is of the candle series. So in Jewish tradition, the Sabbath is always welcomed by the woman blessing the candles and welcoming the Sabbath queen. So Sam takes the candlesticks and the candles and the wax of the candles and creates this image of a kind of movement of a wanderer, of a refugee running through them at this moment of great holiness, but also of sadness and loss. Candles are also used for memorial. You go in a church, you light a candle. On the anniversary of someone's death, you light a candle. And then the wax itself is almost like teardrops. So he continues to have his own vocabulary, and then he's done 125 pieces just on the theme of candles, and we're publishing a book of those. And finally, this piece is from the mid-'80s, I think. And I just love it because it's so beautiful when you see it. And then you realize, if you think about traditional still life paintings from the Renaissance, every object is whole and beautiful. And you go into a museum and say, oh, this must have been painted in the 17th century in Amsterdam. You can tell by the china and the silver, everything's laid out so beautifully. This is Bach's rendition of a still life in the 20th century. every single object is either broken, is somehow pieced together, is glued together, and it becomes, at the same time, a very beautiful composition. I think about his work many times as a historical cubist, because Cubism took objects and images and broke them up into pieces. Sam does the same thing, but he saves those pieces and then lets you reconfigure them, because all of us in our lives have experienced brokenness and sadness and loss. And those of us that have continued to live on have those scars and symbols, but we rebuild out of those brokenness the life that we do have. There's one other sort of interesting image in the background, the teapot. And I love it because my grandmother, who did not read or write English, spoke Yiddish all the time, and she used to say, "Hakni kanchainik." It's a phrase in Yiddish which means kind of "don't bother me," but if you translate it literally, it means "don't hit me in my teapot." A chainik is a teapot, and so Bach has this teapot in many of his pieces, and there's a wonderful set of 2 in the other room called Found in Translation. But essentially, Sam remembers people coming to his father in 1938 saying, "Mr. Bach, Dr. Bach, you should flee," because bad things were going on in Germany and so forth. And he remembers his father saying, "Hakni kanchainik." Don't bother me with this kind of idle stuff. Had they fled, their life would have been very different, and the life of their entire family. So all the paintings that Sam has have embedded in them many personal stories, but at the same time, universal stories. There's an entire room of his pieces in back, probably up to you, and you probably would just wander and enjoy it yourself. It is, for me, always a pleasure having people in the gallery to look at his work, to understand that it is about us. It's about how we live our lives and how we celebrate life, but how we must honor the past as well. So congratulations on your centennial. 100 years is a lot, even more than how old I am. And delighted that you're here. So just enjoy the space. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.